Welcome dear students. Today I am going to deliver a presentation on Carl Rogers' self-theory. And the objectives of the theory are to know about the theory of personality by Carl Rogers, to get acquainted about the life history of Carl Rogers, to know about the different parts of the personality, to get familiar about the concept of congruity and incongruity, to explain the concept of self-actualization, to know about the development of personality. Carl Rogers was not only one of the founders of the humanistic approach, but also arguably the most influential therapist in the 20th century. Rogers' theory is basically phenomenological, in that it placed a strong emphasis on the experience of the person, their feelings, their values, and all that summed up by the expression of inner life. His theory is also known as self-theory. The other name of his theory is person-centered theory. His theory grew out of his own experience in working with individual in the therapeutic relationship. In terms of his theory, there are two fundamental ideas. First, Rogers talked about healthy development in terms of how individuals perceived their own being. Healthy individuals will tend to see congruence between their sense of who they are, self, and who they feel they should be, ideal self. While no one tends to experience perfect congruence at all the times, the relative degree of congruence is an indicator of health. The second idea in Rogers' concept is the conditions for healthy growth, and the role of a therapist is fostering healthy growth through a process Rogers called person-centered therapy. The therapist seeks to provide empathy, openness, and unconditional positive rewards. Rogers called his technique non-directive therapy, based on the concept that the therapist is simply a mirror who reflects the individual thoughts and feelings. Let's discuss the biographical sketch of the Carl Rogers. Carl Ransom Rogers was born in Oak Park, Illinois on January 8, 1902, the middle child in a conservative Protestant family. He attended the University of Wisconsin, where he majored first in agriculture and later in history. Following graduation, he attended the Union Theological Seminary from 1924 to 1926. Subsequently, he transferred to Teachers College of Columbia University with its heavily Thorndikean orientation, where he received an MA degree in 1928 and a PhD in clinical and educational psychology in 1931. At Columbia, Rogers was exposed to the philosophy of John Dewey, taught there by William H. Kilpatrick, and had his first clinical experience with what he describes as a common sense approach of Leta Hollingworth. From 1927 to 1928, he held a fellowship at the Institute for Child Guidance, where he encountered the Freudian orientation of David Levy and Lawson Lowry. From 1928 to 1930, he served as clinical psychologist in the Child Study Department at the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children in Rochester. He remained with the Society as a director of the Child Study Department, later the Rochester Guidance Center, until 1940. During this time, he learned the theories of Otto Rank, which were to be important to him. His thinking was also been greatly influenced, he has noted, by colleagues, graduate students, teachers, and most of all, his continuing clinical experience. Let's discuss the structure of personality as per Carl Roger. Although Roger did not appear to emphasize structural constructs, preferring to devote his attention to change and development of personality. There are two such constructs that are of fundamental importance to his theory and may even be regarded as a footing upon which his whole theory sets. These are the organism and the self. Let's discuss first the organism. Roger defined organism as the sum total of the person, including all that is psychological as well as physical. According to Roger, the organism psychologically conceived is the locus of all experience. Experience include everything potentially available to awareness that is going on within the organism at any given moment. This totality of experience constitutes the phenomenal field. The phenomenal field is the individual frame of reference that can only be known to the person. It can never be known to another except through emphatic inference, and then can never be perfectly known. Roger emphasized that the individual's way of behaving depends on the phenomenal field. That's the subjective reality, and not upon stimulating conditions, external reality. The phenomenal field at a given moment is made of conscious and unconscious experiences. The person tends to check his or her experience against the reality. The testing of reality provides with dependable knowledge of the world so that one is able to behave realistically. In most of the cases, the person accepts his or her experience as true representations of reality, while in reality, they may not be the true representations. As a result, the person may develop misconceptions about himself or herself and about the external world. The whole person, Roger wrote, is one who is completely open to the data from internal experiencing and the data from experiencing of the external world. Let's discuss the concept of self, that is ideal and real self. Roger defines the self as an organized, consistent, conceptual gestalt composed of the characteristics of the I or me, and the perception of the relationship of the I or me to others and to various aspects of life, together with values attached to these perceptions. The self then is basically a self as object, viewing itself as an object in the experiential field. At any given moment, it's an entity. But over time, it's fluid, dynamic process. An important characteristic of self is that it's always available to awareness, although it's not necessarily in awareness to a given moment. In short, it's one's own picture of him or hers. Roger further distinguished two aspects or subsystems of self: the real self and the ideal self. The real self is the you, that if all goes well, you will become the same, while the ideal self is that what the person would like to be. By ideal, Roger is suggesting something not real, something that is always out of our reach, the standard we cannot meet. Thus, Roger's personality theory distinguishes between two personalities: the real self, which is created and developed through the actualizing tendencies. It's the self that one can become. The demands of the society, however, do not always support the actualizing tendency, and we are forced to live under conditions that are out of step with our tendencies. The ideal self is the ideal created through the demands of the society. Roger's view of hidden personality relates to the person one could be, the right circumstances within the society. And for an individual to be truly happy, their public and the private self must be as similar as possible. Let's discuss now congruity and incongruity concept. The importance of the concept of organism and the self, Roger's theory, become clear when we examine the idea of congruence and incongruence between this self as perceived and the self as actually experienced by the organism. When the symbolized experiences constitute the self, faithfully mirror the experience of the organism. The self and organism are said to be congruent. That is, the individual is believed to be adjusted, mature and fully functioning. Otherwise, there would be incongruence. Roger suggested that the incongruent individual who is always on a defensive and cannot be open to all experience is not functioning ideally and may even be malfunctioning. They work hard at maintaining, protecting their self-concept. because their lives are not authentic. This is a difficult task and they are under constant threat. They develop defense mechanism to achieve this. He describes two mechanisms. First, distortion and denial. Distortion. It occurs when the individual perceives threat to their self-concept. They distort the perception until it fits their self-concept. This defensive behavior reduces the consciousness of the threat, but not the threat itself. And so, as the threat mounts, the work of protecting the self-concept becomes more difficult, and the individual becomes more defensive and rigid in their self-structure. The second is denial. If the incongruence is immoderate, this process may lead the individual to a state that would typically be described as neurotic. Their functioning becomes precarious and psychologically vulnerable. If the situations worsen, it's possible that the defenses cease to function altogether and the individual become aware of the incongruence of their situation. Their personality becomes disorganized, bizarre, irrational behavior associated with earlier denied aspects of self may erupt uncontrollably. The next important concept is self-actualization. According to Roger, only the single motive is there that impels human beings into action, and that motive can be described as the actualizing tendency. Roger maintains that the human organism has an underlying actualizing tendency, which aims to develop all capacities in ways that maintain or enhance the organism and move it towards autonomy. This tendency is directional, constructive, and present in all living things. The actualizing tendency can be suppressed but can never be destroyed without the destruction of the organism. The concept of actualizing tendency is the only motive force in the theory. It emphasizes all motivation, tension, need or drive reduction, and creative as well as pleasure-seeking tendencies. Only the organism as a whole has this tendency. Parts of it, that self, do not. Maddie, 1996, describes it as a biological pressure to fulfill the genetic blueprint. Each person thus has a fundamental mandate to fulfill one's potential. This tendency is selective and pay attention only to those aspects of the environment which promises to move the person constructively in the direction of fulfillment and wholeness. Therefore, as already stated, the single motivating force is the self-actualizing drive, and the single goal of life is to become self-actualized. Let's discuss the development of self. Roger, unlike Freud, Sullivan and Erikson, did not try to propose a stage theory of personality development. In other words, Roger did not explain the personality development in steps or states. Rather, he emphasized the importance of congruence between the self of the person and its experience in the development of personality. Adjustment in psychological health have also been explained in terms of realistic self-concept that is congruent with self. Roger maintained that unless we are taught appropriately by those whose love we need, our self-concept is based on our perception and fits well with our experiences. If we are taught to have a self-concept that does not match what we actually experience, we are going to have difficulty. For example, you might learn that nice people never get angry, and then find yourself in a situation in which you are insulted. Your self-concept does not allow you to perceive your feeling of anger accurately. The greater the discrepancy between our self and our experiences, the greater the maladjustment and anxiety. And harder we must reconcile what we believe ourselves and what we encounter in the world around us. Our parent stands to be the primary source of love and affection, and it's desperately important to maintain their goodwill. We want them to praise us, say that we are good, and experience positive feelings towards us. When we do something they dislike and they let us know it, the experience is a painful one. We strive to alter our behavior to get back to their good graces. Roger recognized the three crucial points for parents to keep in mind. First, the child feeling must be recognized and accepted. The second, mother should avoid threatening the child with the most threatening punishment of all, lost love. Third, the hostile behavior must be clearly and unmistakably rejected and prevented. Let's conclude the whole theory. Roger's person-centered approach has been criticized on many grounds, the most important being the change that many psychologists tend to impose their view based upon the native phenomenology. For instance, Roger accepted client statement to be always true and reliable, when self-report normally lack credibility. Roger has been criticized for ignoring unconscious determinants of behavior, attested by psychoanalytic investigators over a long period of time. It's also criticized on the ground that the theory deals only with surface issues and does not explore deeper areas. Thank you for the presentation.